Will I be able to make one entire dice tower in only one video? Okay, Joth the Barbarian, roll for initiative. All right. Wish me luck. Hello, welcome to Breath of Life Development. My name is Josh Foreman, and man, I came close. I mean, you could see the rest of the tower right back there. So close to being done. It could have been done, but I started editing and I spent probably a good 8 hours and I got all these teeny tiny little edits and it's looking great. And then I zoom out and I look at the rest of the footage and oh, there's a couple more hours to, wait. Yeah, so I am not the best editor in the world, and we're just all gonna have to live with that. So this is being broken into 2 videos. My desire to show as many of the individual steps as possible outweighs my desire to make a snappy, fast, popular video, I think is what it comes down to. We'll have to reconcile those 2 things at some point in my YouTube career, but we're just not there yet. So part 1, here we go. So just to provide a little bit of context, this dice tower exists because I'm making a room-sized diorama for my Colossus from the Shadow of Colossus video series. You can check it out here. And there's a big pillar in the middle of the room. So I figured if I'm making a big pillar, might as well make a cool dice tower out of it. So I figured I'd start at the base and work my way up. This is a hot foam wire cutter. I've got 2 of them now. One of them kind of conked out, and then after I took it apart and put it back together, it started working again. I'm not even sure what this brand is. There's several of them on the market now, but this one is actually larger and cheaper than my other one, and it seems to work just fine. Now I'm looking at the scant reference that I have. It's really hard to get reference of some of these particular areas in the game, but I did my best, and I'm also not trying to do 100% accurate. I'm just trying to evoke the general shapes and shape language. That red splatter is not from an accident, it's from when I did this album cover for the band Carcass. You can see that video here. Okay, so this is my Proxon. This is the first wire cutter that I had, and I'm cutting these kind of rooftop things at a little bit of an angle. I think were I to do this again, I would make both the angles the same, but I made them different and I'm gonna pay the price for that later on, as you'll see. And now I decided I did want to at least get a blocked out tower built onto the top of it so that I would know exactly how it would fit onto the base. Oh, and for those of you who aren't aware, this is XPS foam. I've got a couple videos on working with it already, and I'll be doing more. You can see one of those right here. All right, so first I thought I would make a ramp for the dice to roll down. And I'm going about this kind of a silly way. This is one of those things where, since I'm feeling my way as I go, there's all sorts of efficiencies that I'm not doing because I just haven't thought through the design. I'm designing as I build. Now I'm adding a variety of textures. And I'm working on some fancy pillars to go around the periphery of the base of the tower. And I noticed when I cut off these little thin bits, they could actually go on there and make a really nice sort of embossed surface coming off, or not embossed. What's the opposite of embossed? Anti-bossed. Yeah, I'm sure that's what it is, anti-bossed. This particular concoction I have here is a mix of Mod Podge, I believe, and some spackling, along with some black paint. And I actually ran into trouble with this I've never encountered before, and we'll see that in a little bit. For the decorative gate area, I'm cut out the basic shapes that I wanted, and I'm carving the stones in, as opposed to laying the stones brick by brick. It looks a lot more natural if you angle the edges here and there. Now I'm experimenting with using some found objects to accentuate some of the areas. Whenever I'm at the craft store, I'm always on the lookout for discount items like these. Now I wanted something kind of fancy along the tops of the walls. Not too fancy, but something that's not just flat. So I figured I'd cut some of these triangle bits. As I was shopping at the hardware store the other day, I saw this incredible mat for wiping your feet off, and look at this. It just makes fantastic little spiky bits. Now this is shelf paper, but it's got beautiful tiny little tiles, and I'm thinking where the dice come down, I'd like them to land in this sort of fountain or pool looking area. So it makes an excellent sort of bottom for that. Just testing out to make sure the dice will roll properly. And here is some insulation foam that's designed to go around windows or doors or something, but it's foam and it works really well with the rest of the foam. It doesn't carve as well, but if you need a flexible strip to decorate your stuff, it works great. And here I'm just adding some damage to the tiles. I'm just cutting out several of them, and we'll fill that with some rubble. Yeah, I couldn't really cut this stuff really well with the X-Acto knife, so I'm using a hot wire cutter. Did not smell good. Make sure you've got plenty of ventilation and a mask when you do this. And now I'm just layering in some more of the spackling and various pastes, a whole bunch of variety. I like to experiment as I go, and usually it works out fine. Playing with the ratios of spackling to water to paint. You'll see later I use some freeform air, some epoxy clay. Now this care package was sent to me by Dungeons by Hand, and it is a guy who's making cool jigs and such for the hot wire cutter. So I'm giving it the first go. I'll do a more official sort of review of these things later. For now, I just want to focus on getting this project done. I think on the next video, I'll go into more depth about how I'm using these things and how they work. But for now, you can just kind of see, you know, here's a circle jig, for instance. Generally cutting a very narrow, tall cylinder, it's not something you're going to do very often, so I'm going to try it on something a little more, that makes more sense, proportionately speaking. Yeah, and that worked pretty well. There's a little bump here, but that's easily sanded away. And here are these other jigs that help you make a variety of different shapes. You can make hexagons and pentagons and triangles, all sorts of things. And here I'm just realizing, oh wait, I don't actually need to run this along this thing. Because it's already got a flat edge, you can just kind of freehand it, and the wire's going to naturally stop at the edge of the sled thingy. I don't know the names of these, the official names for jig type of things. I figured I'd use this scrap that I cut out of the bottom to try to make a pentagon type of platform. And yeah, so I cut it out, I got it at an angle, it's all really nice. I'm really enjoying this set. I figured I'd try these tiny ones too. These are intended for much smaller shapes. And what I ran into is that there's a little bit of wiggle room between the part that's cut out and the base that it slots into. I actually contacted the guy who makes these and said, it's a little wiggly. Anything you could do about that? Like maybe cut it out of a separate piece so that there's not that laser line between it, right? And he liked that idea and went ahead and made new ones and sent them to me. So like I said, I'll do a more thorough investigation of this on my next video. You can see because it was kind of loose, it's not like a perfect hexagon there, or octagon or whatever. But yeah, you can make neat shapes like this. It's really cool. I decided to switch to stairs just because it made, I don't know, it was looking like an area that people would go to, you know, some kind of actual usable building. So I thought stairs would be more fun. Using a lighter here to get some melty, softer, you know, as stone stairs age over the millennia, they wear down in the middle where they've been walked on a lot, and using fire works pretty well for that. Again, always use ventilation for this sort of thing. If I knew from the beginning I was going to be making stairs, I would not have done them this way. I would have just cut a series of sheets and stacked them on each other. The way I'm doing it here is needlessly complicated. Using a variety of my texture tools, which I go over in this video. And I wanted to give sort of a hint of a portcullis, like they can shut the gate here to keep people out or in. I guess I'm thinking of it more like a dungeon tower, since the dice are kind of escaping from it, you know. And there's going to be bars on the windows. Now again, as I'm kind of designing while I go, there's all sorts of improvisational things that I'm doing that I normally wouldn't. There's some of the effects from hammering. You can see it when it compresses the foam. It doesn't look super great, but I'm going off of the stuff that I did on my last video here, experimenting with the different stone types. I noticed I don't have a lot of this acetone melting, and then after looking at that, I immediately forgot to do it. But yeah, here's the kind of cracks that I'm working at right now. And for this building, I had cut a bunch of these stones anyway that I was using for the tower. I figure I might as well use them to clad this base as well. And sometimes I like to base coat as I go, just because I know I'm going to be adding more stuff and you might be able to see back into, you know, between the bricks and stuff. If it's black to begin with, it just makes it easier. And here I'm using a Sharpie to darken this area because I don't want to break out my paint and then wait for the paint to dry before applying the next stuff. So now this is where my improvisational skills start to break down, because this requires some sort of fancy math to figure out how the angles are going to match up here. And I really had a hard time with this. You know, I come from a sculpting background, not really an architecture or modeling background. So yeah, I ended up just falling back on my sculpting skill to save me from this mess that I got myself into. Here you can see I'm trying to figure out how to get these other spikes kind of coming down so you've got an interesting pattern in there. Again, using the Sharpie to color in areas that I know you might be able to see at certain angles, and I just don't want to paint everything and wait for it to dry. So here I want to get these kind of teeth that go downward in exactly the right place. I want it to almost zipper between the top and the bottom. So I thought what I could do is temporarily put some glue blobs on there and just get it in place, and that will at least help me place the upper row of bricks above it. The hot glue is very easy to remove from this rubber, so I'm not worried about those blobs right now. Okay, remember respirator when you're sanding. You do not want to breathe in dust that comes off of this XPS foam. I've used more spackling, paint, a variety of things to add these splotches that just give the stone a lot more interesting texture. And now I'm using a product called Freeform Air. I have a whole video on epoxy sculpting materials right here. You can check out if you're interested in this stuff. This certainly could have been cut out from XPS foam, but cutting circles and stuff, it just requires a lot of resetting the jig and changing the angle of the wire. And yeah, sometimes it's easier for me, like I said, to fall back on something I'm very familiar with, which is sculpting. Okay, and then making this area, these stairs, so that they'll line up with the stairs at the base of the platform. And now I'm going to start putting in this tile work. I created probably over 100 of these tile squares for doing the entire floor of that huge room you saw at the beginning. So I've got a lot of these laying around. And I'm using toothpicks just to keep them in place while I lay them out. I figured it would be nice to have one of the pillars broken. So I start it with a cut and then I snap it so that I can get as much natural cleavage as possible. Did that sound bad? It's probably a website. And here I want the floor to be all busted up because when the pillar fell, I imagine it caused a lot of damage to the floor, so I'm just tearing up chunks of it here. And I love hammering this stuff, getting those little fractures. It looks so great. Now in this case, I am gonna go through the trouble of just dropping some paint in here so that I'm sure I have total coverage. Since I'm going to be putting all sorts of stuff over and around it, it's just easier to get that black in there right now. Okay, now just doing the painstaking process of adding different textures to all of these tiles, so it looks like they're separate stones from separate places in the quarry that have been laid down individually. Cutting in some more stairs, making sure that my gate's going to line up and be nice. And again, this just saves me time in the long run to paint around the edges quite often. This is a mix of about 90% Mod Podge and 10% paint. Not paint, but the pigment that goes into house paint. I'm using a little, I believe this is made for foam specifically. Just another little melty doodle. And I'm adding these beads. I don't even know what these are for or what they're specifically called. But again, I saw them on sale and was like, oh, I could use these for something. Hey, while you're here, mind hitting the like button? That'd be super cool. Even cooler, you could subscribe. I mean, it's up to you. I'm just saying. You could. After applying this stuff, I always need to stipple it to keep it from having brush strokes. And here you can see I laid it on so thick that in some areas it just blobbed and bubbled. And so before it completely dries, I'm going in with my rubbery nubbery tool and just breaking those bubbles and respreading the paint around. And now I had some of that freeform air, and I'm using that to make a few more original bricks. I did not like how the tiles tiled in this particular area, so I'm accentuating it more, or rather I'm trying to bring them more in line with each other. I don't mind that they're a little bit wonky. This is very, normal on ruined floors. All right, now I'm trying to decide how I want these little triangles arranged, like sideways or front facing or whatever. I'm always updating my Instagram with work in progress as I go, so if you're interested in seeing how this stuff comes together, check out my IG, as the kids say. I don't think the kids say that. And making sure everything fits like a glove. I still haven't quite decided how I want to design these little top crown pieces, so I'm doing some more experimenting. Yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. These are some kind of accessory that's used, I believe, for leather work. You know, little studs that you can stick into your leather, but they work great for sticking into foam as well. The only downside is obviously you can't carve them with the same kind of ease that you can carve the XPS foam. Here I'm doing a little bit of marbling. Most of that will be hidden when I do the dry brush stuff, but it's still worth doing from time to time. Okay, and here's the little pool bottom, and I'm just going in and picking out random tiles to give some natural variation. Got a little too much white here, so I'm just watering this down and spreading it around more, and it'll make a little bit of a wider spot, but that's totally fine. This is supposed to be an old ruined place with lots of imperfections. And I'm cutting out individual tiles and super gluing them in place, just so it kind of makes sense that if these tiles were busted up, that they would still be around there. You know, I don't think anyone's carrying them off. One thing I was unhappy with was the places where I dry brushed a little more light than I wanted, took away the sort of individual tile look. So I'm just going in and highlighting a few areas to bring back those cracks. And then I felt like I got them too dark, so I went back in and re-highlighted over them, and I think that's where I kind of got to the sweet spot that I was happy with. All right, I am using black hot glue for this part. Every once in a while I'll break out the black simply because I know that it's going to be in a place that you may be able to see the hot glue, and it's just way easier if it starts out black. It's more expensive than regular hot glue, so that's why I don't use it all the time. And making sure that the tower is going to slot in properly. I figured there would need to be some sort of a sleeve that goes around the top that the tower slots into to keep it upright. And if there's going to be this sleeve thing, it should probably be decorated. So I'm breaking out the old googly eyes and thinking of ways to accentuate those. I thought maybe the actual little disc that comes in the googly eye could be used on the surface of it, but I couldn't find a way to make it easily fit on there without leaving weird gaps. So instead I'm using these O-rings. And to get nice round circles, nothing beats a nice drill bit with a round circle. Now I scry the lines in with an X-Acto knife and then go in with a pin to whiten them out. And then in some places I'll make it whiter, and other places I'll add chipping, etc. Now the googly eyes, I don't want them sitting way back in there, so I'm adding basically spacers with some really cheap styrofoam. And filling it again with some kind of mystery paste. I honestly can't remember which one this was. And I figured I could use hot glue to kind of fill in more of the base. And it was around here that I realized, you know what? If I want this to be strong, I cannot count on foam to hold up this 5-foot dice tower that's on top of it. So I decided to use some of this wood trim that is used often on ceilings or floors where the walls meet the ceilings or floors. There's a word for it, and I just cannot think of what it is right now. Anyway, it's fancy wood strips, and it's strong enough that it will definitely keep my tower up. Now the downside to using wood is, as with the other materials, like the metal bits, it doesn't carve the same way that the XPS does. So I need to break out the power tools, some dremeling, and other carving techniques to get it to match. All right, and some more fancy spikes. This is more freeform air, and I'm using this to just coat over all of my sins. I could not figure out how to get these lines to line up along with the angle, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just sculpting it like a fool. Oh, what is it? This book keeps getting in the way. I don't know what it, I guess it's called The Scarred King, Book 1 Exile, and it's on sale now on Amazon today, and you should check it out. It has fantastic reviews. I don't know, it's always in the way. I hear someone really cool named Josh Foreman is the co-author of it and did all the illustrations. Conveniently, there is a link to buy this book in the description. Okay, I'm doing a heavy coat of Mod Podge in here because I know dice are going to be rolling over it, and so I want it to be very strong. Speaking of very strong, we want this sleeve to be very strong and have just the right amount of space for this to slide in. So I'm doing some brackets just to make it extra sturdy. And in the process of doing that, I ended up with these gaps in the corner. So again, I'm gonna go back to my old strength of sculpting and fix that. This is not freeform air, this is epoxy clay. Again, I have a whole tutorial on using this stuff. Also, I Twitch stream regularly. For those of you not in the know, on my own channel, I stream on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. and Sunday afternoons at 1 p.m. Pacific time. But I also stream on the Reaper Miniatures Twitch channel every Thursday at 12 Pacific. Okay, nice snug fit. Now it's time to make the gate. As usual, I had a very simple idea of just some upright, pointy sticks with, a hinge. And also, as usual, it ended up getting more and more fancy as I went. So I'm just kind of blocking out where I want them, how big I want them, how they should swing. And again, because I didn't have a very specific plan going in, there's lots of improv, putting it together, pulling it apart, putting it back together, moving them back and forth. It turns out the hot glue does not stick super well to these. I was surprised to learn. But yeah, now I'm seeing the clearance from the top to the bottom, and I'm trying to decide the sort of shape language that I want for the top of the spikes. Does it go flat across? Does it go at an arch upward? A concave or a convex arch? So I'm just kind of thinking through, considering the shape of the wall as well to see what would work best. So I just drew myself a little template. It's kind of the inverse of what the wall is doing, so I think it works well. And so I'm popping the sticks off and then moving them down, because it'll be easier to cut the bottoms flat than it is to resharpen the tips. And yeah, here's where I start getting fancy, and I'm like, I've got all these various, found objects. Maybe I can use these, but sadly these beads were just slightly too small. So again, I go back to my O-rings, and that seems like a promising direction. This is a hinge from a jewelry box. You can find these at craft stores, online, looking at secondhand stores, but I really like how the shape language matches what I already designed. Yeah, I had to go to super glue because the hot glue was not cutting it. And it helped to kind of cut a little shape in there, put in the super glue. That's a kicker that I just sprayed on there to make the super glue dry super fast. And then we were getting things working better. While I had my Dremel out, I figured I might as well do some imperfections on these metal triangle bits that I got, so they'll match the stone better. Got some on here too. All right, so I'm liking this, but I'm noticing that the gate is not wide enough. So I started experimenting with, well, what if I carve into the pillars? And then I thought it would be better just to move the pillars back a ways. One of the things I love about this XPS foam is that even after, in the middle of the process, you can change directions so easily. And trying to figure out which way I want the gate to swing will determine which way the hinges go on, etc. Now I traced the hinges onto the surface so that I could cut out a perfectly shaped little plug for them to embed. It just always looks nicer that way. It also let the gates swing closer to the wall, which I thought was cool. Now using more of the O-rings for decoration in various ways. Since I drew on here with a Sharpie, I figure, well, I've got my black Mod Podge out, I might as well just put a big old stain streak down there. And I'm using the Mod Podge to add a little bit of texture to these metal bits as well. This is plumber's epoxy that I'm using to fill in here. It's super strong and sets really fast. And if you start carving it about 5 or 10 minutes after it starts to set, it's not too bad. After that, it gets very hard to carve. Now I'm using more epoxy clay. The rings were cool, but I didn't think they were quite enough on their own. So I'm adding some bevel to them, basically. Now, this is where I realized if I had planned this better, I would have done all this detail work while the sticks were separate. It would have been 100 times easier because working around them where they're so close together was a huge pain. And while I've got the clay out, I'm adding a little sort of unique decoration bauble on top of the other bauble. Using some finishing washers here as a base. I need to cramp them so they have kind of a square base to fit inside that little stone crown that I have on top. That makes it so it sets perfectly in there. It really looks like one coherent piece that way. And more sculpting around these joints here, sculpting, carving, sanding to get the shapes that I'm happy with. A liberal coat of Mod Podge. These little decorative baubles were from fake keys, you know, like little decorative jewelry keys. I just sawed the shaft or whatever that part of a key is called off, and these made nice little sort of gate decorations where you could imagine them interlinking to lock the gate. And using epoxy sculpt again to get these welded into place really fast. And it looks like if I squish them together where they're perfectly overlapped, that makes a really nice design. All right, now doing a little more carving on these blobs that I just kind of blobbed on earlier. Sanding them down, and that gives them a nice faceted look. All right, I had an extra one of these. I made several of these when I made the Colossus. This is actually the design that goes on its snout, but since I had made a mold for it, I made several of these tiles, and I figured this would be a good sort of threshold tile. Okay, for the gate, I am now giving it a base coat of very dark silver, literally just mixing craft silver with black, putting it on all the metal bits. Now I'm adding some color variation to the stones. This is, I call this a clown pass because it looks very colorful and clownish. That's kind of taken from the world of CG, but I think it's appropriate. Now I'm going to do the rust on the gate with these weathering pigments. This one is smoke, a little dark earth. I don't really care about the particular name or brand. I'm looking more for the colors, just trying to find stuff that really looks like old rust. And I want it to be very old rust, which is not like bright reds and yellows. It's mostly, you know, blacks and dark browns. So I'm starting with the darkest color. That was matte medium, by the way, that I mixed in. And I'm just patting it on. I'm still not convinced this is any better than just using cheap paint, but you know, I see a lot of people using it, so I wanted to give it a try. It has some grit to it, which is nice, but at this scale, I don't know that it really shows or matters. Now going on to light rust, and this I'm going to use very sparingly. Just in the places where you can imagine the water pools on a fairly regular basis. Mostly around joints and such. This is a very matte black, and I'm filling in little areas and adding just places where I want it to be a little bit darker. Places where you can imagine the water is dripping and splashing its minerals up onto the wall, maybe creating mold spots and such. All right, now this is a mixture of mostly water, a little bit of brown and black ink, and some matte medium, along with a few drops of dish soap. Oh, and I need to point out that I sprayed this down with a clear coat after the what I call the clown pass and this part. And that makes it so that I can feel free to wipe it on and off. This wash I can wipe on and off as much as I like without worrying about messing up the base coat. And I'm going ahead and just using that same stuff on the gate. It still looks a little too fresh for my taste. You know, I want this to feel like these ruins have been here for hundreds of years. and most iron is going to rust away to almost nothing in that time. Okay, now for dry brushing really large flat areas like this, I find what I do is I have 3 surfaces that I rub it off on 3 different paper towels before I'm really happy with how little pigment is left on the brush. And at this point, the pigment is almost dry. It's almost like a powder that you're rubbing on there. But it allows you to get really subtle gradations between the light and the dark areas. And for very flat areas, that's really important. Putting the 2 sides together to make sure it looks like, you know, this was all broken for the same stone. Dry brushing really detailed breakage points is just so delicious. I try to be really subtle with it. I don't want it to look illustrated. I want it to look realistic. So yeah, I definitely underplay it, if anything. I also want to point out I'm not using white. This is about 20% gray, I'd say. But yeah, one thing it does is it unifies everything. It brings all those different color varieties together. You could definitely get away with using like even more extreme colors on your tiles, but like I said before, Shadow of Colossus is pretty desaturated, so I'm erring on the side of keeping things more monotone. And I'm just picking out a few places to be a little more heavy-handed with the dry brush. I really love the way this ended up looking. But again, I want to point out, I'm being judicious with my heavy-handed use. I'm not being heavy-handed everywhere, just picking out a few spots where I'd like the eye to be drawn. All right, and I figure it's time to finally attach these pieces. And triple check that it fits together and nothing's going to wobble or break. Now, I noticed that this edge here does not line up on the left and the right. No one would ever notice that, of course, but I would. So, tearing this up, adjusting the edge so that I can scooch it over just that, 2 millimeters. So now the sides of the gate will match up. And I figure while I'm here, I might as well extra strengthen the connections by putting in some toothpicks with the hot glue. Okay, time to attach the gate. I'm using tiny little finishing nails here to literally, I guess I'm not literally nailing into place. Is it literally nailing? I don't know, I'm not using a hammer, but I am using nails. You know what they say, when all you have is nails, every metaphor is a hammer. All right, getting my cool little columns all set up. And now I want to see what happens when this just falls down naturally. And I'm fairly happy with that dispersal. I'm just thinking to myself out loud, okay, as this moves down, it would shatter through this piece here, it would tip over, break the ground there, and then all the pieces on top are going to roll off of that. And again, using my black hot glue, just in case you can find an angle where you'll see the glue. Okay, everything's down really well. Now what I need is more different sizes of detritus than what I've got right there. So I'm just using my sludge coat gray, mixing in a little bit of my wash color, and just making a delicious detritus soup. Delicious and nutritious. Here's some other random spiky things that I got that I figured would be a good way to dry the little rocks. And then these little itty bitty ones, I figure I'll just put them on this silicone pad that I have and they should dry fine. Now one thing I'm noticing, so remember I flagged this thing that some of the sludge, experimental sludge that I was using caused a problem, and here is what it is. It was bubbling in some areas. Different than the bubbles that you're seeing right now. That's just because there's, I shook up the bottle with the dish detergent in it. But yeah, for whatever reason, these bubbles cropped up. And here you see little bits where there's like, the only way this would happen in real life, I feel like, would be if someone glued a pebble to the wall. And that's just not something I see in my reference. So I try to get rid of these tiny little boogers that poke out. Okay, and doing some more extreme weathering and staining. Again, I look at my reference and I see there are sometimes very dark streaks that run down ruins. All right, my rocks have dried and I'm ready to lay some more detritus bits around. They seem to peel off just fine. All right, I'm using a dropper with, this is just PVA glue, typical Elmer's school glue with a little bit of water mixed in. Now I've got some gray decorative sand. And the places where I want to make sure it's definitely going to stick, I'm adding more glue, and now I'm spraying on isopropyl alcohol. That makes the glue dissipate more, so it can find all the little cracks, but it still does a great job holding everything down. Definitely want to get a lot of little detritus around these broken bits, because you can imagine the various bits that flaked off of them, as well as parts of the ground that got wrecked when it fell. And going in and adding a few highlights back in. Got to plant some grass, just a little bit. You know, these ruins are in sort of a underground arena, so I'm not going to go plant crazy on it, but a few little highlights here and there are nice. Okay, now I'm doing lichen, and this is the fastest way to do this, I've found, is to lay down a big puddle of isopropyl alcohol and then a variety of little dabs of white, yellow, orange, depending on your environment. In this case, I'm going with more earthen tones. There's also green and black lichen, but I like this particular mix. It goes with the grass, it goes with the brownish base tone that I have to the wash. I think it works well. You can see the more alcohol is down, the more the paint is going to spread out when you dab it on there. Now this area I felt like got a little too much, so I'm using kind of a bristly brush with alcohol on it to just knock that back a bit, and then dab it away with the paper towel. And here we see more bubbles. They seem to be emerging with time, so that's interesting. And there you go, the base of a dice tower. And technically it still does work as a dice tower, but if you want to see the epic conclusion where that big tower is built and stuck on and you can see the dice rolling down all 5 unnecessary feet to the bottom, please subscribe and you'll see that next month. In the meantime, just real quick, I want to give a shout out to 3 patrons that all of them this month, this is their 4-year anniversary supporting me through Patreon. I can't express enough gratitude to Mike Welsh. Super thank you. Caprice Adams. This is an incredibly talented photographer, and she's just a lovely person all around. And then also Terranscapes, who had an incredible YouTube channel. I believe his videos are still up there. You should check out the backlog. There is some amazing terrain kind of stuff in there. Thank you so much. I miss your channel, but I understand, life makes certain demands and you gotta pivot when you pivot. So I just appreciate the years of amazing videos that you put out there, and super appreciate that you find my creative output worthy of support for all these years. It's so great. I now am going to have to move houses next month, in fact, and my rent is going to literally triple. I have to stay in this area for medical network reasons, and this Seattle area, this particular time of the year, this is literally the worst time to buy a house or rent a house in history, and we're being forced to do this. Our current landlord needs the house for other things, so what are you gonna do? Anyway, yeah, so that support is super appreciated, and I would also very appreciate anyone else who finds this stuff worth supporting in order to get a place that still has an art studio. Like I said, triple what we're paying right now. So we're going to be incredibly house poor for a long time, and any amount of support greatly appreciated. Like I said, tune in next time, and we're gonna see the conclusion. I can't wait. See you guys next month. Bye.